What was the only bit of forbidden knowledge that Sidious ever wrote? Greetings, Acolytes, and welcome back to the Archives. In a recent holocron, we talked about why Emperor Palpatine refused to follow in the footsteps of the ancient Sith and construct his own personal holocron. There, we ended up discovering that while Sidious had no intention of ever having his knowledge outlive him, Palpatine did state that he was not so selfish as to keep everything he learned to himself, and thus came about the Darkside Compendium, a work consisting of 3 books that Sidious authored himself, books which shared his various notes and experiences with the dark side. The fact that these books exist is a treasure of themselves, as the moments where Palpatine shares his inner thoughts are few in number and valued beyond compare. Sidious may have been the ultimate Sith, as he understands the dark side in ways that no other being had before him. But not only this, but we enjoy just looking at the way that Sidious thinks, because the inner machinations of his mind are barely even human. So join us today as we explore and break down the only place where Palpatine stored his knowledge of the dark side, and the only pieces of knowledge that Sidious wished to share with the next generation of Dark Lords. Like we stated before, the Darkside Compendium is broken up into 3 parts which are titled as follows: the Book of Anger, the Weakness of Inferiors, and the Creation of Monsters. We should note that these are the culminations of all of Palpatine's life experiences, as he wrote this compendium sometime around the year 10 ABY, which was after his resurrection, so he had plenty of time to reflect on his life and give us a full perspective. But unfortunately for us, these tomes are so forbidden that only small excerpts of them are available to us, even outside of universe. So we'll just have to make do with what we have in these 3 passages. So now, without further ado, let's begin our tutelage under Lord Sidious directly, as we open the first work, the Book of Anger. In this transcript, Palpatine describes in detail the true secret to mastering emotions needed to achieve unlimited powers. The very first thing Palpatine talks about is the Jedi view on this concept, and how the Jedi perceive anger and calm. Palpatine writes this: many Jedi claim to have found serenity, and that through that serenity they have overcome anger. Such arrogance is astounding. These fools have never faced their anger, and thus have no idea whether they have truly overcome it or not. True calm is only achieved through testing the limits of one's anger and passing through them unscathed. The capacity for this ability lies with everyone, though most fear to test their own strength, and thus considered at best weaklings, and at worst, irresponsible. An interesting beginning to this book, Palpatine denotes the idea that Jedi have mastered their anger by avoiding it, instead of facing it head on as the Sith do. Of course, Sidious's idea of mastering one's anger revolves around actually using it rather than suppressing it. But what is astounding here is that he doesn't refute the necessity for calm. For most Sith, peace is a lie, so things like serenity do not exist for them. But Palpatine actually makes excellent use of this calmness. At one point he attempted to train Vader in the ways of restraint, with patience and calmness. A Sith can harness their hatred inside of them until it brews and becomes an internal storm of power. Sidious tried to teach Vader not to shoot off his anger as soon as it came to him, but to squirrel the power away into a container made of his own mind. By hoarding his anger instead of releasing it, one allows it to simmer and refine, turning it into a storm of power that can be unleashed at their own discretion. This is how Palpatine became so powerful over so many years, by using calm to his advantage. Palpatine corrupted the Jedi way of serenity by indeed burying his darkness, but allowing it to age like a fine wine. But once he releases this against his enemies, their defenses crumble beneath his overwhelming might. But anyway, Sidious continues by telling us how to actually use your anger to create this power, as he writes this: when the Force is sensed and moved by emotion, form the very center of the body, and meditated from the lower vital centers of the being, it acts with the destructive power of a storm and the savagery of a beast. Anger is the most potent catalyst to this kind of power, and anger then becomes rage, and when channeled through the vital gate in the center of the body, can unleash absolutely unstoppable potency through one's body. Here we return to the fundamental truth of the Sith, which is that anger transmits into rage, and hatred breeds unstoppable power. But Sidious is not just teaching us wild, unstoppable, impulsive anger. Instead, he's telling us how to focus it to get the most out of it. In that vein, Sidious actually continues by revealing one of his most powerful secrets: how to focus the sunbeam of anger into a deadly laser. Sidious continues to write this: I have learned that anger and will joined together are the greatest power one can achieve. I have learned to meditate anger and will with clarity and precision, and I have learned to open the hidden reservoir of the dark side power. Anger, concentrated by will in the vital center of the body, creates a portal through which vast energies are released, the energies of the dark side. This is what most Sith neglect. The issue with the Sith, and perhaps the reason they most often lose 1v1 battles with Jedi, is that they do not learn the simple truth of not releasing their power in wild waves of energy. By concentrating rage down with patience and will, it unleashes a railgun blast of force energy. Only true Dark Lords of the Sith can learn how to master and to harness this raw power, and thus use these abilities with deadly accuracy and focus, crushing bones to dust with a single force push like Bane or Malgus, or boiling the blood of their enemies with their lightning like Sidious or Plagueis. Sidious ends this chapter by explaining that using his will, he has been able to extend his reach in the dark side across the expanse of the galaxy in order to harm his enemies from hundreds if not thousands of miles away. He has even learned how to shatter space itself to conjure storms, energy storms that are vastly destructive and virtually unstoppable. However, Sidious does note that while he can summon these storms with a mere thought and an inclination, that he has not yet perfected the ability to control them, something that he aims to change. Unfortunately, he would never attain this ability though, as one of these uncontrollable storms ripped apart his own clone body and destroyed his Dark Empire fleet. Palpatine was literally consumed by his own power. Moving on to the next book though, The Weakness of Inferiors, we finally get to see Palpatine put his money where his mouth is, especially when it comes to ruling others. Famously, the entire reason why Palpatine hated the Jedi, even before he became a Sith, was that he believed that with their power, that they could rule as gods if they wanted to. But because the Jedi never respected that power, they squander this great cosmic gift. This is written in the next book in this quote: "It has been said that anyone who knows the ways of the Force can set her or himself up as a king on any world where only she or he knows the ways of the Force. Any Jedi could do this, but the Jedi, fools that they are, adhere to a religion in the Force which is only used in the service of others." Palpatine believes so much in this theory that he wrote this book as a sort of a manifesto, and a guide to teaching other Force wielders how to properly subject their own planet to their rule. Palpatine begins by explaining that the thought process and general existence of those who live without the Force. He says that they are inferiors, continually endangering their own lives and the lives of others through poor decisions, reckless behavior, and a simple inability to bring their ambitions to reality. Palpatine calls them children crying in frustration because they do not comprehend their own limitations. In Palpatine's opinion, the weak need structure, the sort of structure which shows the weak where to place their existing social order. It is up to the wise and the powerful, in a sense, Force wielders, to provide structure to civilizations, and to teach these weaklings how to survive and thrive in a galaxy filled with chaos. And to do that, you need rulers who are born and have learned from this chaos. In order to do this, Palpatine generously provides us with 4 insightful tenets to keep in mind when speaking of the weak. The first is, all power comes from outside the weak. The weak have never been known to believe in themselves or in the ability to wield the power. The second goes as follows: the face of authority. The weak live as in a dream. All their thoughts, actions, and urges are governed by the face and the voice that controls this dream. The face and voice that they have learned to obey. The face and voice of authority. With these first 2 rules, Palpatine perfectly exemplified his totalitarian views on the general populace. We always knew that he was a megalomaniac, but his views as a dictator extend into truly depraved territories. The final 2 tenets showcase how to enforce rule, with the third saying this: the law of fear. A consequence of the first 2 tenets is that the weak will live in fear. The mere suggestion of violence from one in authority is enough to inspire their obedience. How can one who doesn't believe in his own power stand against the power of another? It is impossible. And now finally, the 4th tenet. The weak do not understand the Force. The Force is the ultimate means to gain authority over the weak. The weak do not understand the Force. The weak do not sense the Force. Therefore, how can they understand or use it? So it is that the weak are at the mercy of those who know and use the power of the Force. The proper use of the Force can inspire awe and obedience in the weak. This echoes back to how the first Dark Jedi subjected the Sith pure-blooded race of Korriban. They dazzled the Sith people with their refined displays of power and made themselves out to be gods. And so the Sith people worshipped them and did whatever they decreed. The final tenet of Sidious's monstrous manifesto was the very birth of the Sith Order. So how could he not believe it was fundamentally true? Of course, as the Emperor, Sidious wisely never actually made grandiose displays of his own power, but yet allowed Vader to do that for him. And speaking of Darth Vader, we reach the third and the final book of the Darkside Compendium, which is aptly named The Creation of Monsters. The first book showed Sidious's mastery of the Darkside's finer details. The second revealed the extents of the Emperor's obsessive megalomania, but the third delves into an even darker territory, the expanse of Palpatine's cruelty and disregard for life. The very reason the Second Great Schism, resulting in the creation of the Sith Order, occurred, happened due to a Junta Pal's discovery of dark alchemy, and the manipulation and the perversion of life. In this book, Sidious gives us pointers on how to properly create our own monsters, homemade monsters if you will. He begins by explaining that while the Force can be used to create terrifying illusions, that it can also be more satisfying to create tangible monsters, creatures that are willing to shed and devour one's enemies at will. But in the growing of one's monster, there are beginner's mistakes that one can avoid. One should not create their creature with too much intelligence or self-awareness, for instance, as the primary function should be to serve their master and follow basic commands. Palpatine had taken Plagueis' research notes in manipulating life and studied them extensively, and he mentions that while he didn't fully understand his master's work, he was happy to take advantage of the results of it, which Palpatine used in the creations of mutants and creatures. Sidious's instructions begin with stating what a novice may want to start small, perhaps with manipulating a creature on the bottom of a food chain, and then twisting them so far beyond recognition that it climbs much higher on the evolutionary ladder. He advises to examine the creature for any natural attributes and abilities that can be augmented for maximum destructive potential. And at this point, Sidious launches into a giving of slew of practical advice, such as giving the creature teeth and claws. If it has eyes on the sides of its head, put them in front, or give them a new set of eyes. Strengthen your creature's muscle and bones, especially the jaw and along the spine, so that it can consume the bones of your enemies successfully. Palpatine then goes on to say, do not worry about the creature accessing standard doorways, or to be light enough to be supported by floors. A large beast is a wondrous thing to behold. It can also make them an easy target though. Sometimes the smaller the beast, the more agile monster is the better option. And as a side note, I love how practical Sidious gets when casually discussing his monster creation. In a lot of his works, Sidious gets very philosophical and talks about esoteric ideas such as emotional concepts, which only resonate within the Force. But here, Palpatine is being quite rational, laying out the specifications for various creatures. But his advice doesn't just go to enhancements, but he also provides a warning for one's safety, as he writes this: conquer the temptation to create specimens that are superior in every way. The danger of such monstrosities being turned against you is far too great. Instead, focus on instituting controlling weakness in each and every beast that you construct. Make it stronger where you are weak, but weak where you are strong. It must have a fatal flaw that you, and only you, know how to exploit. And always, without fail, be prepared to destroy your most valued creation, or be prepared to be destroyed by it. Towards the end, Palpatine's advice extends into training your monster. Alteration should not be purely cosmetic. He says that monsters are most effective when they're hungry, and in some degree of pain. Because of this, Palpatine suggests exposing its nerve endings, so it feels pain constantly. Torture and starvation is also another useful training tool. Sidious also speaks about testing your monster, setting it loose in a pit with at least a dozen of its original species, preferably blood relatives. With this in mind, and with the passage that Sidious ends with, there is a horrifying realization to be made. Sidious may not be entirely referring to animals when it comes to the creation of monsters, but also he is speaking of people. We will allow your imagination to fill in the truly abominable implications of the knowledge of what we just learned. Palpatine did this with humans or near humans. To end off the creation of monsters and the Darkside Compendium as a whole, Sidious wrote this: of all the monsters I have created, I still regard Darth Vader as something of a minor masterpiece. No, he was not an entirely alchemical creation, but he was my monster nevertheless. And even though he failed to live up to his full potential, there was so much pleasure in transforming Anakin Skywalker from a bright-eyed, tousle-headed youth into the greatest Jedi killer of all time. Yes, he ultimately turned against his master, as monsters sometimes do, but that was my failure, not his. Given the opportunity to create Vader again, I would, and with zeal. There was not a time long ago where we analyzed this passage and talked about how Sidious was not upset with why Vader betrayed him. In fact, as he said, it was not Vader's fault that he betrayed his master, but Sidious's. He admits that he had been too arrogant and too trusting in his own visions, not careful enough, and aware of the growing conflict within Vader. Luckily, he had his backup plan in place though, and because of that, Sidious says that he enjoyed creating Vader so much that he would eagerly do it again. And he even attempted to do this with Luke, creating a second Vader. That's how much he just purely enjoyed it. And with that chilling finisher, this was Palpatine's dark side compendium, or at least what we have of it. A lot of times we never know what we're going to get into when we dive into the mind of Sidious. But today, we discovered a world of darkness that many Sith Lords could only dream of achieving. But what do you think of this, my friends? Do you feel enlightened by this forbidden knowledge? The only thing that Sidious left down to be inherited by the Sith and Darksiders that would follow him. This is what he wanted them to know. This is what he wanted you to potentially know. Will you focus on your refinement of the dark side and learn new abilities to become something greater, to rule over the weak? Or will you squander what the Force has cosmically granted you? Will you spend your time in the service of those who do not value you? Will you spit in the face of your gifts? Or will you create monsters and rule? The choice is yours. But these are the final words of Darth Sidious. As always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting our archives today, and as always, may the Force be with you.